Yeah, there's multiple points of view, but we're looking into the only one that matters, the writer. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and I'm pleased to have with us today screenwriter Barry Levy to talk about his studio debut, Vantage Point. And yeah, without a doubt, there's a lot of intricate plot lines and character mechanizations going on in this film, but luckily we have good old Barry to set it all straight for us. Remember, if you dig this podcast, don't forget to check out the latest issue of Creative Screenwriting Magazine. Every issue, we work overtime to make sure that we pretty much have the most interviews with screenwriters out of any other magazine on newsstands. Of course, look for us on newsstands and in Barnes & Noble bookshops and Borders bookshops in the United States, Canada, and Western Europe. And without a doubt, go to www.creativescreenwriting.com to read all about what's in the latest issue. But now, without further ado, let's jump right onto the stage of our sold-out screening right after I introduce screenwriter Barry Levy to discuss his studio debut, Vantage Point.
All right, as you mosey up to the stage, as is our honor, here's your very own issue of Creative Screenwriting. You're page 70. Page 70, buddy. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you.
I'll start with a question that's on everybody's mind, without a doubt. Please tell us, how did Jack Shepherd get off the island and then join the Secret Service? No? All right. We always start with breaking in stories. Congrats on being number one at the box office last weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You went to Washington University in St. Louis as an undergrad, and you're a guy who loves film, but there, to my memory, was no film to actually study there when you were there. Is that right?
There was not. My parents assured me... Sorry, I'm a little under the weather. My parents assured me I was going to a liberal arts education. It didn't matter what I wanted to do. Eventually, I just was going to get that background, and so I went to Washington University, and just as time went on, I just kept taking film classes on the side at Michigan. My folks lived in Ann Arbor at the time, and at Eastern Michigan, and everything I could. And so I actually had enough credits for a film major, but there wasn't a major to graduate with. So a thesis advisor encouraged me to take all my history credits, all my film credits, and create my own major. And then my thesis became a feature-length movie that we shot on campus that helped me get into USC for graduate school right out of college.
So you basically started the film program.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
When you went to USC as a Starkey, that's the graduate producing program, the Peter Stark program as it's known. Sorry, Starkey's the term, I know it because I went there. What was it that you got out of grad school? Because a lot of people that listen to this podcast, you know, they debate should they go to film school. You just said how you created your own, which I think is the best way to teach yourself kind of the tricks and learn on the job. What did you learn from grad school?
It's a good question. I think probably more than anything that the Stark program really emphasized entrepreneurship and learning how to work not just creatively but also professionally in Hollywood. And I mean, there are a number of really successful and really talented writers that have come from the Stark program. Garrett Lerner and Russ Friend are executive producers on House. Al Goff and Miles Millar are running Smallville. So there is a history of writers who've come through and been successful. But I think, I mean, I was so young. I started at 21. I finished at 23. And you know, most people finish college at 22, 23. So I was probably not mature enough. But intellectually, what I walked away with was a real education that helped me get started pretty early on and sort of find my way and kind of know a bit more about how to do things than I thought I would.
Did you do any writing while you were in the Stark program, or did you make any films as a grad student?
I did, and I produced a short film my second year with grant money through, that Ray Stark had given the program, and so it was a film called Dust and Other Particles of Attraction. It went on to win at some of the festivals as a producer, and it kind of taught me also that, yeah, I don't want to be a producer. I mean, it was harrowing. It was very sort of brutal to sort of have to figure out how to do it all on my own and sort of scotch tape together the funding. So I said I would just be I figured I'd find an assistant job somewhere and I'd just focus on writing. And I did for about 6 or 7 months, and then everyone at the company I was at basically got laid off, and I wound up getting promoted and running development within a year. And
which is interesting because, I mean, you're one of the few writers to come through the screening series that's actually sat on both sides of the desk, per se, because you're not only a writer, but you've been a development executive, too.
Right.
The company you were at was Nelvana.
Yes.
And they specialize in kids' animation. They did Strawberry Shortcake. Hold your applause. And also,
please hold your applause.
And also Beetlejuice. What did you learn kind of as a development executive, being on the other side of the desk, about the scripts that would come in that you'd read?
Maybe I learned techniques and work ethic that I think helped me when I went on my own. I mean, there were certainly writers who we had a draft, 2 sets of revisions, and a polish, and that's exactly what they did, and to the sort of letter of it. And that's a way to get stuff done. It's not necessarily a way to get stuff done well. And in terms of the time commitment and the devotion, I also could see that. And frankly, also, I met a lot of tremendous writers who were huge support to me when I was getting started. They would read my material, give me comments and support and encouragement. And when I was having, the lean years, they had gone through it and could tell me how to get through. And kind of, it was actually really fun when you're walking the picket lines, running into the writers who I had worked with a decade earlier, or 8 years earlier, and just catching up. But I think as much as it was not fun to stand there with a sign in my hand, walking in a circle, it was nice and rewarding to see these people again.
It's interesting. We've interviewed a lot of execs through the magazine, and some of the questions we always ask them is that old adage true of, if it's not popping in the first 10 pages when a spec's coming in, that they're not going to finish it or they're not going to read it? Were those habits that you formed?
Yes, to an extent, but it's a little different in TV, right? Because a lot of the stuff you're reading are speculative, sort of samples of existing shows. And in terms of the stuff, when I've read something that popped, I mean, it's fun now to see those writers have created their own television series and have moved on to great things, because you can sort of tell that they have an original voice. But trying to find those tricks of the trade, definitely, I could see some of that.
What were the common mistakes that you'd see some of the writers make in scripts coming in, the writers that wanted to break in? Because, obviously it shaped you as a writer, that experience too, by reading so many other people's scripts.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's always 2 schools of thought, especially because the stuff I was doing was primarily television. So there's one school of thought that says your spec script should be a perfect example of what an episode might be. And then there's the audacious episode, the one that sort of stands out and gets notoriety. And there are definitely 2 camps. There are the people who look at the first one and say, you know what, that's how it should be. But that's really hard to gain notoriety. I mean, it's hard to be sort of perfect, and it's... personally, reading half-hour samples, with this way the sitcom format is, it's very hard to tell if someone is truly gifted or if they mimic well or what they did. And conversely, if they do the audacious one, hey, I'm impressed with their, creativity, but what does it tell me about their ability to deliver? In terms of
which scripts would you pick out of the stack and give the jobs to? Because you were granting the jobs.
I'm swayed by the audacity. I mean, I always have been. I think I'd like to see things differently.
Just when you were about to be promoted, to my memory, further up the Nelvana ladder, your grandmother passed away.
Right.
And it was kind of a turning point for you. Talk about that moment and what you decided to do.
Well, I went back. When I was at Washington University, I made the film. My grandmother lived about 5 miles away, and when she was in hospice, I went back and I just sort of looked around. I was able to drive around campus, and I realized, it was 6 years since the time I'd made that movie, and I'm no closer to making another one. And not only am I no closer, if anything, I'm helping other people to sort of achieve their dreams. But what about my own? And I always loved that line in Shawshank Redemption. It always touched me, get busy living or get busy dying. And it really just pushed me to write the script that ultimately became a calling card for several years. And my boss was incredibly supportive, helped me out, gave me a consulting deal so I could transition and was sort of freed to go do my own thing.
It's cold out there to go from executive to writer.
Right.
What was that like? I mean, what was it like for you to score your first gig?
Well, we'll talk about that first gig in a second. But right. But the best lesson I learned was you sort of can tell who your friends are, because it's one thing when they're taking your calls because you have work that you could deliver to their clients. It's another thing when they're doing it because they're genuine and they mean it. And that was a big sort of part of the transition, was discovering kind of who I was and who were the people I could count on in my life. But the script was a script called Broad Daylight, and it wound up doing very well in the Nickel Fellowship contest, and was optioned several times through that.
Did it place, or where did it?
It was the one that missed, and it was actually, I was going through really funny sort of bad patch, and Greg Beal, who runs the fellowship, calls and goes, I'm really sorry, you are the 11th script in the top 10 of the finals. and I just wanted to let you know. And I was in such a weird mood. I'm like, that's not really good enough. So somehow, I don't know what I did to sort of compel him, but he picked up the phone and called CAA and a couple other places and had me read. And for a time, I was represented there, and it was sort of based on that fluky experience.
At CAA?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm guessing Broad Daylight is not a sequel to Sylvester Stallone's 1996 film Daylight. Give us the pitch. What was it that grabbed their eye?
Again, there's sort of audacity. It's about a bank heist where the robbers put money into the bank. And it was a year or two before Inside Man, so it sort of made sense in that regard. But ultimately, it became a calling card, and if nothing else, it got me working. And the kind of work was direct-to-video horror. I wound up writing, I guess, 3 for a company, Region Entertainment, some of which were produced uncredited, and some of which were produced credited.
The Wolves of Wall Street was the one that was credited? Is that right? Yeah. One person in the back.
One fan in back, yeah.
That's the wolf.
It actually is the best werewolf movie ever without a werewolf in it. The effects were kind of expensive, I guess.
I'm a Teen Wolf kind of guy, but give us the pitch. What was?
They were stockbrokers by day and werewolves by night.
I never would have guessed. But no, that's
it was
good.
Subtle
that's
like
good.
that, wasn't it? Yeah.
I mean, it's good that you were doing those gigs. Those were non-union gigs,
right?
And let's talk around this however you want. In 2004, I know you had a very frustrating experience with a script that you wrote.
Right.
Tell us the rest.
Well, I had written a film years prior that had bounced around, and ultimately, to get the deal done, it was to option the script, and then right before production, they came to us and said, okay, so congratulations, we are making this movie, but if you want it made, we need to take your name off the script. Yes.
Was there a reason, or is it just
there's
it's the Levy demographic doesn't hit most Americans under
anti-Semites? No, I don't know. It's the long and short of it was that it's sort of international finance needed a different name or a different passport to be a part of the process, and that project, ultimately was a pretty big step. And in fairness, it really was a big step for me too, because sort of a chapter had turned. I had executive produced a TV movie at the same time, and the two projects together ultimately gave me this sort of financial and even creative freedom to sort of move on, from, no more of what I was doing, and sort of new energy, new focus, and out of that is where I wrote Vantage Point.
Because basically you had that bad experience.
Yeah, it was like never again.
Yeah.
Never again.
Well, so what gave you the idea for Vantage Point? What first jumped into your head?
I've always been interested in sort of finding different ways or interesting ways of telling stories, and that was really the sort of storytelling of it kind of was the first inspiration. And I had always wondered, if there was a second gunman on the grassy knoll, what would that guy have been doing? And how did that work? And how did they operate? And where did he go? And and so on and so forth. I mean, 1,000,001 questions that sort of arise. If anything else, I wound up in this sort of period when I was transitioning, signing with New Representation, signing with management at Evolution Management. And at the time that I signed there, I had 2 outlines for new projects, like really detailed, long prepared things, and then I had this cockamamie idea, that became Vantage Point, and they're like, we love the outlines, focus on the outlines, and I took some general meeting, and I told them about this other one, because I didn't want to tell them about an outline where, God forbid, if they didn't like it, or if there's something else, how deflating that would be if it was competitive. So I told them about this, and the people flipped, and it meant, I guess I got to figure out how to do this. And so I took a big map of Madrid, because at the time when I wrote it, the first draft, it was Madrid, not Salamanca, and it was right after the Madrid bombings. It seemed like if you were going to do a world summit to honor the dead from terrorism, that's where you were going to do it. And I sort of mapped out how it all worked, and I had cards for each of the 7 characters or the 8 characters, and started plotting it out.
Now, out of that meeting that you pitched it, did they give you any cash, or did they say, go write a script?
No, they said, come back
to us?
Well, I sort of threw down the kernel of the idea, and they're like, come back and give us the pitch. So I worked up the pitch, and I brought it to my managers, and when they heard it, they responded really favorably. But at the time, as an, I don't know if it's the term, baby writer, as someone who is sort of inexperienced, it's not the kind of project you're going to walk in and just, we believe you can execute this on a pitch. So, I tried a few more times, and while I was going through these meetings and taking their notes, I started on my own writing the outline. And I actually even met with artists to see if I could build like a not a diorama, I don't know what you'd call it, like some sort of model to scale of what Plaza Mayor in Madrid looked like, and here's how this whole thing works, so that I could show someone, here's how this would work. And the hope was, I think for me, I wasn't writing this because I thought, this is going to be a big splashy deal. It's just, I think this is a movie I'd love to do, and hopefully we can do this, through the studio system, if not independently, and if not, I'll do this, because I feel like this is something that is controlled enough that I think is manageable.
How long did it take you to write the script then, doing it that piecemeal kind of process way?
It was a really weird period. I mean, during that period, I got engaged, moved in with my now wife, and probably 4 months, but start to finish, we had a script. That script went to UTA, and on a Friday and on a Monday, we signed with UTA, and 2 or 3 weeks later, the script went out on a Wednesday, and on a Thursday, it sold. So, I mean, it was really sort of a head-spinning time.
Talk about that process of having your first big spec go out to the town, because
right.
it's a big deal for a writer, and it's just interesting to hear the calls come in, who's bidding what.
Right. Well, and again, in 2004, I really sort of said after these other 2 experiences, the never again, I wasn't going to get my head sort of caught too far up my ass about, worrying about this stuff. So it went out on a Wednesday afternoon, and I was told even that the weather was rainy, and it was great because that meant people were reading. I don't know what that meant, but the next morning, I was getting up, and I was really looking forward to going for a run and just clearing my head, and I got a call from my manager that you should stay by the phone. You can't go for your run. Because this is at 8 in the morning, or right around 8 in the morning, but by 9 or 9:30, I'm on a conference call with one studio to walk through any questions they have, which I'd never heard of that before, but there was questions at one studio, and another studio was prepared to set such a call, and then all of a sudden Neil Moritz's offer came through, and here we are.
It was reported what it was sold for, I believe, correct?
It was reported it was like mid-6 against $1 million.
That's great. I mean, especially for your first project, and that's what got you your WGA card too.
Yes,
because now you were finally union. Vantage Point. One of the concept obviously is different points of view.
Right.
A lot of people try and confuse it with Rashomon, which is a retelling of a story from a singular point of view.
Yes.
And in each case, the person telling the story could kind of put in their own little elements, and some of the storytellers are liars. Talk about how Vantage Point is different and how you decided on these specific points of view.
Okay, well, so I knew the Rashomon question would come up because it's interesting, like in any review, and I mean, the ones that run the gamut.
It's incorrect, yeah. I mean,
I hadn't even seen Rashomon.
Well, this is omniscient point of view, and Rashomon's very specific.
Right.
People lie when they retell the stories if they feel
right, and I was really interested in the idea that no one knows the truth. Not that there are people manipulating the truth. I mean, I was much more interested, and so in each level, and there are big differences between the script and from its very first draft to the last days of the shooting draft to what we see on screen.
We're going to get to that in a second.
Okay, but in that regard, each layer was like peeling back an onion, because you start in the newsroom, which in the news van, and that would be the furthest away. So as though if you were someone in America watching this, on C-SPAN or CNN, this is what you would see. And then the next is if you had just been there, and that's Howard Lewis, who would have been the next story. And then the Spanish police officer, who may or may not know what's going on, but he somewhat has access. And then you move one step closer to Barnes, who clearly has access but doesn't know everything, and so on and so forth. And the layers were sort of to see that no matter how close you got to truth, no one knew everything. But that's certainly what was sort of being played. And so the Rashomon question altogether, I find it fascinating because, my wife tells me I should not be reading the reviews. And I think not the bad ones, but not even the good ones, but there are certainly the bad ones to sort of comb through, and they all talk about Rashomon. And I swear to God, I'm like, I never said this had anything to do with Rashomon. I can't help you.
No, it doesn't have anything. I disagree with those reviews myself. I want to kind of set up the progression that you were just talking about how the script changed. So everybody's all excited about your script. Talk us through some of the things that were kind of in the first draft that, based on the first rewrite, you already started to get rid of. Like, for instance, there was a Enrique, Veronica, and Javier love triangle.
Right. Well excuse me. Awesome. Well, so there was definitely the initial script there was a love triangle, because what I was also interested in looking at, and I think some of this remained to this final draft, but some of it went away, is that the characters, good or bad, were very human. And in the initial draft, very similar to like Paul Greengrass's Bloody Sunday, everyone is just human. And so the idea that these terrorists, which we always sort of paint in such extreme colors, that they actually had human emotion behind their action was important to me. I wanted to see that. And so there was a love triangle in that bracelet that Veronica hands Javier initially had been a necklace, and that necklace had actually been a necklace that Enrique had given to her initially. And so her absence of it around her neck made him jealous. And so it was a sort of and there was no brother in that first draft. So some of that was and then some of it also, as we just talked about, when I thought it was a very contained movie, the president had been in an underground bunker that was sort of a secure bunker, so it was sort of a more contained location than actually dealing with the whole hotel and all the elements that went along with that. And then there was no car chase. There was a foot race, but that was about it.
I like the foot race. A lot of this is writing in the moment. And you were just talking about characters as real people. It's tough to do because there's such a kinetic pace to the movie. It's happening allegedly in real time. How conscious were you of how much background information we need to know about these characters as we meet them and as they pass through?
I was conscious that you needed to know them, but there's sort of a great debate. Like when I think of No Country for Old Men, I think of Josh Brolin's, and I know him from the way he moves and the way he sort of inhabits the character. But there's no great scene early on when you're establishing character. He's just inhabiting the character, and I felt like in that same sort of school, this is how I think these characters can inhabit who they are. We don't need, one of the things that has sort of evolved here is we see Barnes with his pills and getting dressed and the scars, and that's something that sort of came out of the process of development. Initially, I didn't feel like I needed that to know who he was. He knew who he was, then that was sort of enough.
When I interviewed you, you brought up a William Goldman reference that you always like to kind of point out. To talk about that, because I thought it was good.
In Harper, there's a great bit where he had to try to establish him, and he did it like with the simplest emotions, which is Harper was so down on his luck as a private detective, he took yesterday's coffee filter and he rebrewed coffee out of it. And that was his way of saying, okay, here's who this guy is. And I thought that was just genius. It was so simple, and we didn't need to get very far to do it.
Talk about your research that you had to do. I mean, the concept of using doubles. Obviously, we know Saddam has a bunch of doubles, had, unless we killed one of them and he's still roving out there. He could be a podcast listener. That's what I'm saying. So I mean, like, how real is that? How much did you get to meet with the Secret Service?
We did. Actually, Neil Maritz's brother-in-law was the head of Bush's lead team. So we actually had tremendous access, and then we had former Secret Service agents there every day. But even through the development process, Neil's brother-in-law Brian was able to sort of help us out and give us access. And what he basically said is, I'm not going to. I mean, he didn't say this in these words. I'm not going to deny it, and I'm not going to tell you we do it. But even if they did do it, he wasn't going to reveal it, and he didn't think it seemed implausible. Was how he sort of worded it.
This is where we get to the complicated part, because we're going to try and track some of the rewriting that was continued to be done. But I just want to point out for a moment that it's interesting. There was a lot of rewriting that was done. It was sold in 2004, right?
The end of 2004. And
then you did rewrites almost through production on and off. Is that right?
Dear God.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting about it. With your past as a development exec, it almost seemed like you were ready to navigate that, because I think what's so interesting here is no other writer was brought on to rewrite you, which is rare for movies these days. How did you navigate those very murky waters?
Generally speaking, I think what my managers always encouraged me to sort of remind myself is that I'm supposed to be a collaborator. I'm supposed to not become a stenographer and just sort of take the notes and just do it. But I have to voice my concern. At the same time, without a track record to sort of stand behind, I'm sort of, on some level, I have to voice my opinion, but on some level, it's also a director's medium that you only can push so far. At a certain point, there are other people in this process, in this collaboration that, not only deserve a voice, but frankly, they're steering the ship. Does that answer?
Very political. I like that. See, I could see it, like, just in that answer, how you did it. In 2006, was the plug pulled, if I remember correct?
2005. About
2005.
A month before I was to get married, we thought we had a go movie, and then we didn't. the script, here's the whirlwind tour of the script sells at the end of October. They asked me who I want to direct, and 3 weeks later we're sitting in London with Paul Greengrass explaining to him why he should do this movie, and he explained why he didn't want to. And his protege is who he recommended, and within about 8 to 10 weeks he's in L.A. with the job, and we're starting. And so by February of 2005 we are on our way to doing the initial round of rewrites, with the target being at some point in the summer of 2005. And we kept getting closer and closer to the summer 2005, and we had locations in Spain at that point. We had everything ready to go, except we didn't have a cast, and it was about 6 weeks out, and the questions are coming, what are we going to do? And if we don't go at a certain point, we lose this one plaza, so we could shoot this other plaza. Blah, blah, blah. Why don't we push until next April is the comment. And then at that moment, Stealth comes out, doesn't perform up to par. And the question is, maybe one of the reasons that the movie didn't, in the Monday Morning Quarterback, is maybe it didn't have stars. And this was a movie that was an ensemble movie at the time. It wasn't going to bank on the fact of having stars. We need to maybe write star roles or determine if this is a movie that we all want to make.
That's really what they thought? Stealth didn't have stars? That was the problem with Stealth? It's just good to hear these things.
Well, I think it's also important to note that as the writer, I hear it from the person who heard it from the person who heard it from the person. Okay. So by the time it got to me, that's how it went.
So you're suddenly told you need to write some kind of media roles. So what were some of the things that you did to beef up those roles, even though, as we just said, you weren't inventing long, detailed backstories?
Right. Well, in the case of Barnes, that's when we start learning that Barnes has a past. We start learning a little bit more about his history and how he got here, what it means. And then the relationship that Barnes and the president have, and that there's a history there as well, and those sort of enriched those roles to some extent. And we also, Javier developed a brother. I mean, I don't know how else to say that, but that's where that comes from.
Well, it's interesting because that reads really fast without much of a backstory. He's doing it to free his brother.
Right. But so those elements, but that unwinds the love triangle, and once it unwinds the love triangle, how does that work? And so those things start taking shape to try to make it more of a star thing. And then at that point, there's still questions about where this movie is going to go. Is it going to happen? And I have to say, I said this to Neil over the weekend. Neil Moritz held this movie together. I don't know exactly how, but that's, I think, the greatest thing he could have done is that by the summer of 2006, when this movie was for all intents and purposes dead, he brought it back to life. Got it made in Mexico City with a replica of the plaza for $1.5 million, which was cheaper than actually shooting in the real plaza in Salamanca, Spain.
Wow, that's great. This is where it starts to get complicated. And this cracks me up. I just want you to try and explain it. You told me at one point, just to explain to the various executives on the project, that you actually had a map that you were carrying around that had an outline and things drawn on it. That
early on, even to explain to my managers when it was a pitch, I did have one of those goofy wall-sized maps of Salamanca, and I did have highlight of here's where this chase would be, and here's how the plaza was, and here's where this entrance. And so I did know the geography enough.
Did you also have a big outline board with the story?
You know what? I've learned how to do that since then, but I didn't. But what's amazing is that Sony, just prior to production, did that. They didn't. It was very weird. But I went in one day and there's a huge poster board which maps out each of the 7 stories. Here's what they see. Here's what they hear, as opposed to seeing. Here's what they think is going on, and literally this huge thing. I was so impressed. I remember going away, calling everyone, "Oh my God, they're really serious about this."
That's cool. Take your drink right now, because this is a long question as we get into the really complicated stuff. I read the 2006 draft. I thought it was great. By this point, Spielberg had read it, and he hired you on assignment based on reading that, which we'll get into later. Was there ever a chance, firstly, of Spielberg directing it, or was that just never?
Well, so in the whirlwind of the end of 2004, we're meeting with Paul Greengrass. They asked me who were my first choices, and I said Paul Greengrass or Alfonso Cuarón. So I guess what happens is the script goes out on a Wednesday. On a Thursday, it's sold. But one of the producers is married to, at the time, a woman who was a rather prominent agent at CAA, and she sends it to Spielberg and a couple other people, and then lo and behold, the dominoes start falling, and I guess within 2 weeks, 3 other directors had seen it. I guess all the William Morris directors were sent it. and directors are calling Neil saying they want to do the movie, which only adds to its notoriety. At that point, Steven Spielberg's agent calls and says, so, Steven's halfway through, likes it. If he finishes it, is it his? And Neil, crazy, says he's really not our first choice.
Really?
Well, and I think what he's saying.
See a mistake.
What he's saying is essentially there were enough other directors that were at that moment circling that it wasn't something where he needed to wait, because at the time, also in fairness, it's not a Steven Spielberg comment. The fact is that Steven had 2 other movies back to back that he was committed to doing. So this would theoretically be the third, and he already had the Abraham Lincoln movie and other projects he was circling. So it wasn't necessarily, who knew what was going to happen.
Here's what's interesting, though. Spielberg was intrigued enough to kind of put it out there that it was something you're interested in. You were hired on an assignment based on his having read your script. But the rewriting did continue. The draft that I read that was right before production, I think, in '06, it had the stories almost like Reservoir Dogs, in which each character has their own short film. Right. And then between them, all due respect, we'll get to this in a minute. There was really just a cut to black. We'll get back to the transitions, but the movie itself changed a lot from that '06 production draft, and the rewriting continued. Was anyone ever like, if Uncle Steve likes it, maybe the rewriting's done? Because the danger is you could rewrite yourself into the ground.
Well, but in fairness, also, we don't know that Steven Spielberg was ready to go shoot a film tomorrow. We he was interested. It didn't mean that he wouldn't have gone through the same. Excuse me, please.
Yeah, take a drink of water.
And we don't know that he wouldn't have gone through the same process that Pete Travis went through. I mean, arguably there were a lot of questions. And I reread the draft that sold, and I don't know if it's just the writer and me going, "Oh, I hate this," but there's a lot of stuff that I think we'd made great improvements on. The script that you actually read, I went back and double checked, was actually the draft that wasn't at the beginning of production. It was 3 days from the end of production, because we were still doing rewrites to sort of appease some of the actors going into the final days. And so, yeah.
But the stories were separate in that draft. I mean, there wasn't the intercutting, and I don't know. I was surprised that they started changing all the precepts of what they bought in the editing room. It seems like they filmed a lot of what the script was. And I just want to start with transitions for a second, because What was beautiful, I thought, about your script on the page, when one of the stories was over, I'm just going to say, there wasn't all this mumbo-jumbo on the screen of a rewind. I mean, the audience is intelligent to know what they just saw, and it really was just like a straight cut to 15 minutes ago, and the kinetics of your script, even at a cliffhanger moment, is just rebooting a new story from a different perspective, and you get it. And I was just...
But Jeff, how will people know to laugh?
That says a lot. I mean, I really do think it was beautiful what you did on the page, because it was simple. How did the stuff start happening in the editing room to take away some of what I think they bought and they all liked in the beginning?
I think at some point, being the writer, I was down in Mexico. I got to see them shooting quite a bit, but I wasn't in the editing rooms, and everything I hear, just like everything else, is like the fourth person telling the third, telling the second, telling the first. What I do know is that the initial cuts of the film didn't seem to work as executed and as sort of designed. And there was one editor who had come in, and one of the solutions was we could do these rewind interludes, because the way that the interludes were written, it wasn't quite a fade to black as you're talking about, but there was actually a baton handoff, because I was always really interested in a really clean, succinct, almost elegant transition. Those weren't shot when we were down there. It was a really tight production. They were doing 6-day weeks in Mexico City for, I think, 10 or 12 weeks with a director who didn't speak Spanish and a crew that didn't speak English. So it was kind of a challenging production in that regard. And so these transitions seemed to give energy to it, and then the alternative to them didn't work. So all of a sudden the transitions work best in terms of the solutions. And it's sort of like, in post-production generally, you're going to have to play with the hand you've been dealt, and that's the hand we've been dealt. In terms of what was working, in terms of
what about the cutting up the stories?
Because
I mean, they really did play as their own little stories, their own little short films, which I think was something really nice on the page too.
Look, there's a quiet heartbreak being a writer because it's a collaborative medium. I think I probably should have just published my script and called it a day. But I think when you go through this, you see that everyone has their own ideas, and you have a first-time director. You have who did, I think, Yeoman's work, but did it in a context with some really established actors who had some of their own choices that they were ready to make, and you had limitations financially and professionally around him to get it done.
So in that process, how many stories were cut? Was one lost? Was one condensed?
The Sigourney Weaver story was condensed to about a little less than half of what it was. And then all the stories didn't have such cliffhanger endings. They all ended at the same moment. There was sort of a rigid structuralist thing, and then the last two...
Well, right. Just to clarify for the audience, all the stories were ending at around the same moment, and then when the seventh story was at its ending point, they all caught up together.
Yes.
Which there are still traces of that left here.
And that CG shot of the camera coming down right when Anna's in the middle of the road, that was there. But so in the 7 stories, when they balanced out, Anna was the thread. She was the girl in the red dress, or the red hooded jacket from Schindler's List. She threads them all together, and then it makes sort of sense that she's in the middle of the road at that moment. And at that moment, we get the 16th minute from all perspectives. But in terms of the last 2 stories, they were separate stories as well. I lobbied hard, but like I said earlier, it's a director's-driven medium, and the producer has tremendous hit credits, and I have none. And
what was the ordering of Dennis Quaid's story? Just out of curiosity.
Dennis Quaid's was 4th.
Okay, and it comes earlier in the movie.
It comes second, and again, one of the emphasis that the studios wanted to make was to make a studio star-driven vehicle. And so bring him in sooner means Forrest Whitaker goes back a few.
We got to ask a couple tough questions. First off,
you didn't just do that?
Yeah, well, don't worry. There's more. What was your toughest scene to write? What was the one that really kept you up at night that you had to keep returning to?
There was literally like a handful. I mean, I think the toughest one was like the president. What the hell's going on in that hotel room? Because it just we didn't. I mean, when the script sold, one of the compliments that was given to me was, "Congratulations, you've written the first unpolitical political thriller." No one wanted to get political, and so we had to find something for them to discuss without really sort of taking sides in the issue. That was difficult. In the absence of the love triangle, trying to find the motivations and really clarify them with those 3 was really tricky. And then, for Barnes, one of the things that was always hard for me, you asked about it in the post, I heard that you're Nancy. I listened to all your podcasts, and Nancy Oliver.
Podcast listener, right on. Very good. You listen to it while you jog, right? Is that what you told me?
Yeah, I find it really
So,
relaxing.
you're getting exercise, but I'm, in your pocket, and I'm not getting any exercise.
Actually, you're in my head.
I'm in your head?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But Nancy Oliver talked about constantly wanting her lines gone. And I actually wrote in an email of some of the notes I'd given when I'd seen an earlier cut, I acknowledged that a couple of the lines, like Matthew Fox has a line about, this war will never end. I said, I am responsible for this line. Please take this out.
That's smart. That's smart.
But ultimately trying to find the stories became such the focal point of the editing process that some of the stuff that happens in like Lars and the Real Girl, which sort of I think make that story pop, is things get cut out that we didn't need, and I think here some of that as well. So some of the dialogue, at least for me, I hear it makes me sort of squirm because I'm like, yeah, I didn't need that. We didn't need that.
Well, you said it yourself. That's kind of leading into the 2 tough questions I have before we turn it over to the crowd. Am I wrong in remembering in an earlier draft that Sam, the terrorist, actually wasn't even a Middle Eastern guy in one of the drafts? I remember something about Oxford. I could be on crack, but
I don't know anything about Oxford.
What would you say if their goal as the unit was? Was it just primarily to kidnap the president?
It was to kidnap the president.
Okay. And were there other political things that you had kind of motivated into the early drafts that were lost as to beyond kidnapping the president?
No. I mean, there had been an earlier version where, when Bruce McGill says we took their bomb and we took their men, and this was going to be the negotiation back. But even that became a little vague because we didn't actually say this was the Mujahideen Brigade. It was someone loosely affiliated with that group. So
okay. Fair enough. This is the tough one because just all my friends are split on this. I'm sure people in our crowd are, so I'll just ask it. Matthew Fox this is a spoiler for our podcast listener. Matthew Fox is a sleeper agent. It's very, very difficult to get a sleeper agent into the Secret Service. To our knowledge, it's never been done. I think it's audacious that you did it. I love that you did it. What was there anything ever more to it, or why Matthew Fox was siding with these terrorists that was just part of his motivation? Because that's the only thing that it's the twist that you can't guess, but it is very unclear in a sense.
Well, in his backstory, in the discussions that we've all had, one of the sort of comments is that both the shooting that had taken place a year earlier, but even other experiences, have really made them cynical or burnt out to the experience. And in talking to some of these Secret Service agents, it was really cool because Neil's brother-in-law was able to hook me up with the guy who was in charge of Clinton's detail, the guy who was in charge of Bush Sr.'s detail, and you got to talk to these guys. And
there's a lot of vetting with these guys, I'm sure they told you, for anyone that joins the service.
But they also will tell you that, you know what, they protect the institution, they don't protect the president, which means that they're not partisan, but they're also very passionate, like they're very loyal Americans, but there is a part of it that does burn you out. And so, and sort of our understanding was that it's a character who, you know, had once believed and maybe now didn't. As opposed to the other way around, which is, you know, I'm going to go get myself recruited by the Secret Service because I'm, you know, a believer in some extreme ideology.
Or maybe it was something for the Dharma Initiative.
Yes.
Sorry. Just to throw out a little more loss there, I'm going to open it up to the crowd. Right there, you, sir, on the aisle in the blue. Question was in regards to, since 9/11, there's been a lot of assassination stuff, Caesar remakes, etc. He listed a very long list I'm not going to repeat. But why do you think the kind of assassination storyline is coming back?
You know, if I had to guess, and it's just a guess, for me it was only a way of sort of exploring various perspectives. But if I had to guess, I think there's clearly a frustration within our zeitgeist that we're all looking for some answers, or we're angry, or they're frustrated. And this sort of fantasy probably exists, but it really was never something that was primary for me.
And the Brits made the TV movie, The Assassination of...
Death of a President?
Death of a President,
God,
yeah.
that terrified me.
Okay, another question. Right here, you on the aisle. Great question. You know, as a first-time writer, it was the year of the strike, your first, you know, movie's coming out, but it's the movie that gave you your WGA card. You know, he was on strike, he was a Teamster. What was your experience being on strike for the months that you were on, and what was your picketing like?
Okay, well, it's hard. First off, I don't do a really good job of handling things that are not in my control, and I think that's probably a very writerly comment. But somehow the strike was so much bigger than me that it was very easy to sort of accept that there's out of my control, and what sort of went along with it. And in terms of picketing, it was a very rare, a very unique experience of just walking the picket lines. And I think there were a lot of guys, and I certainly found some compatriots of people who similarly felt like it was a really interesting, pause in our lives. I have newborn twins, so it guaranteed me time to spend with family that I probably wouldn't have spent otherwise. And it also got old really fast. I'm glad we're back at work, and I'm glad that life moves on.
And now that the strike's over, you could go back to ignoring your family, which is important in the twins. All right. Those babies are outside in the car. Somebody's got to help them. All right, so you, sir, in the hat. What was your thesis film that you made into a movie? You're talking about at WashU? The one that won awards?
Yeah. It was a romantic comedy. It was, I guess, Harry met Sally at college. Meet his freshman year friend.
They did meet in college. Remember on the road trip after school?
Yeah.
Just thought I'd point that out. Sorry. All right, you, sir, right there. I actually had that written down. I'm glad you took that one. I guess the first important question about Sam's cell phone, Sam the terrorist, we're talking about the amazing, unique possibilities of his cell phone, is is he using the BlackBerry browser, or because that thing sucks? But I mean, in Windows Mobile 6, not so bad, because it's Explorer.
In 2006, we didn't have the iPhone. That's the problem.
Oh, Sam would have an iPhone now? That would be the awesomest ad ever.
That would solve everything.
iPhone, right. Terrorism, rocks. Well, so I mean, talk about that, because look, in all movies, he is hitting on a serious note. There are suspension of disbelief issues that writers, yourself included, I'm sure, take to heart. Aside from the brother having great cell service and no Bluetooth headset because he doesn't want to run down his battery, right. So he's connected. Right. He has an amazing cell phone. Was that always there? or were there other ways that he was making things like fans and guns go off and bombs?
The gun going off thing, we actually did do the research, and that could be done very simply. And the fan thing, the whole thought was that it just somehow linked some sort of power supply. And there was at one point where I think the critique had been, it's like he has the bat utility belt on because he had too many different devices, and so there was the thought to consolidate.
Was this a Sony phone, actually, he's asking?
To my knowledge, I think all the phones are Sony Ericsson phones, but I don't know.
In the film?
Yeah.
Could Sam's anger have been from, like, he wanted to get out of a service contract? Like, he was signed into, like... All right, sorry, another question right there, you sir in the middle in the gray. So his question was in regards to, you know, as a first audacious screenplay to kind of be your big first spec, you broke a lot of conventions. You did ensemble writing rather than a focused character piece. You had an antagonist that doesn't show up till very late in the movie. It broke a lot of conventions. It was very audacious. Do you think that it was the fact that that's what it was in its initial incarnation that was making you having to rewrite it so many times to satisfy executives, producers, and ultimately actors? Was it that the concept was a little too bold?
You know, I don't think so. I think all the rewrites were stemming from the director / producing team trying to help visualize how to execute this. At least the first round when we were going towards production in 2005. I think I think what happened is that the script in its initial conceit, each one of the 7 stories also had potentially its own look. Like the first one was going to look different than the second one because the second one was going to be inspired by the handycam style, and each one had its own aesthetic. It just became sort of director bait. And once it became director bait, I think it didn't become the star-making movie. What became difficult was to try to rewrite it to accommodate that second go-around, the second wave of rewrites. And that was definitely challenging to try to, how do you hold on to what this thing is? And I think, to a large extent, I think we did a pretty good job. It really, even the draft that he read 3 days before the end of production, is pretty similar in its spirit to what sold.
But the ordering is so different because Lewis was number 2, is that right?
Well, all those were the same. What happened in post made it very different.
Right, but I mean, like in the original draft, it was the
Yes.
camera team, it was Lewis, something else, and then
Enrique, and
Quaid.
Then, right, and then President, and then Javier.
Right. See, this is, I hate to say this, the other thing that I loved about that draft was that each story brings you closer to the president
Right.
until you're actually with him. And then the terrorist basically is the last story, and they all catch up.
Yes.
That was the other thing that I really liked, because you're right. Lewis's POV was much more on his Steadicam as the second story.
Right, and each one got us closer, and each one had its own style. I mean, there's something about that I think meant, when the director met with actors, he used to say to them that you get to play 7 different versions of the same role. And that was his way of hooking them. That was a very exciting aspect. And I don't know that that's necessarily what we wound up with.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. You, sir, on the aisle. Great question. It was in regards to what you learned about kind of outlining as more after the fact. You said you do it a lot more now than you did on this film. Well, you know, he says he's read a lot of screenplays, but he doesn't get to see a lot of early outlines. What are some of the things that we would see on the page if we were looking at your outline? Is it bullet points now? Is it like a paragraph? Any dialogue?
I did write an outline for this.
Well, right. You mean...
Yeah, but now what I do is something very different. I mean, I sort of have learned the hard way that you can get yourself caught in webs by just writing an outline. So now I do a huge bulletin board with index cards where I can sort of bullet point out as you're talking about and then see it visually sort of all the way across. And then I tend to wind up practicing either with my wife or with someone else, sort of going through the story to sort of make sure here's how it tracks, here's where it's weak. And then also it's very easy then to sub out things that aren't working and replace things with things that might work better.
Is your bulletin board just Act 1, Act 2, Act 3?
What do you mean by that?
Like are those the columns of your outline on your board, or is it just a numbered scene breakdown when you put it up on your bulletin board?
But I guess it does say Act 1, and then it just as many cards as it might take to tell that story, and then Act 2, Act 3, yeah.
Just geeky question, because I've interviewed so many screenwriters. Do you go vertical or horizontal?
Horizontal.
That's strange. Most people are vertical kids, but that's
Really?
good. That's good. Another question. Right there, you, sir, and then we'll get you in the back. What was your key for fleshing out the outline during the 4 months to get the
I
script
did
on
have
this one?
like a really terrible handwritten chart where I was like, at minute 1, we start each story. At minute 5, the president shot. At minute 10, there's an explosion. and I sort of had to mark, here's where every character is, and here, sort of to keep track of where they were. That plus the outline helped me get to script.
You, sir, in the back. Question was in regards to exposition. A lot of your exposition does come through action. You know, they're yelling things on a cell phone. They're saying things while they're running. His question was also about, like, kind of the exposition going back to Barnes taking a bullet for the president coming out when he's running out of the car. Of course, we first see it in the GNN room because they have tape pulled on him.
Right. Well, I think there's also the other question of the action set pieces themselves, how it's described. Is that what you're? Yeah. Well, to answer the first part, the flashbacking in his own head was brought. It was an editorial decision. I mean, there was definitely that scene shot because we had it in the GNN room, but to put it in his own perspective was something that they brought in later. In terms of secondarily, in terms of the action, you know, in the car chase as it exists now, to sort of give an example. We had written that when Taylor is forced into continuing his pursuit, that he sort of triggers a car crash. The car crash was not a car flipping over end over end and coming right for Barnes, but he triggered a car crash by nicking and nailing the end of another car and it spinning out and blocking Barnes. So we were writing what was essentially the action, and I think that, like, you hope for any sort of second unit guy that to sort of elevate in his direction, take what we had and make it even better. But it was.
Were you writing every beat, like on the page? Like was it like big paragraphs for a car chase like that? Or
it was, and it was, and then it wasn't, and then it was again. Because there's always the question of, like, do we want to promise too much? Do we not want to promise too much? There was I think a lot of the rewriting also was a lot of hand-holding to massage. How do we word things to make sure it goes through the system okay?
One or two last questions, you, sir, right there. Sure, we're going to get to that later, but let's do it now. What was the assignment from Spielberg? It's the Button Man is the answer.
It's a graphic novel. The same author who wrote A History of Violence.
John Wagner.
Thank you. And it's another one of his books called Button Man. And Button Man is sort of a game where the rich own the poor and play a game of kill or be killed. And
like Most Dangerous Game, basically a revamp.
Yeah,
right?
but set in the city today. Sort of a gritty feel. And then what I'm working on now is Kung Fu for Warner.
A movie version of the TV show, or a new
movie version.
TV version. All right, cool. You also had an assignment because obviously for a film that was non-political, you got into a lot of interesting other political
comedies, exactly.
Projects. You ended up briefly on Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, what was that like as an adaptation? Because I mean, it's a series of books, it's video games. There's a lot of source material there.
You know, it's an excellent question. Technically, I'm still the writer on Rainbow Six because I've never been rewritten. But right now, I think Warner's Paramount's trying to figure out what is the next step to do. But it was really challenging. It was a 900-page book that I was given in a video game, in a magazine, and I can't even remember all the other materials. It was like a gift set.
It was a doll, a Rainbow Six doll.
Right. And it was really challenging. I mean, I feel pretty proud of what sort of worked through the system and what we came up with, but as a process, it was pretty challenging.
Is there any status on when Button's going to go, or if it's going to go? Or?
I have no idea. You know, okay. post the strike, as he was asking about the strike, I mean, post this, right now, everything's just sort of coming back online.
You also had something set up with Bruckheimer, is that right?
Yes.
Are you able to talk about what that was? Or?
You know, I guess that I understand that there's not a lot of discussion of development with their stuff.
Gotcha. A TV show called Everyman with Frank Spotnitz from The X-Files, is that right?
Yes.
What's the status of that? Or?
That is dead because it was force majeured from the strike.
What was it? What was the concept?
It was awesome. Nanotechnology in an agent's face can make him look like any man in the world. And so the idea was that your lead actor in your television series could literally be played by your guest star each week, so that truly he could be anyone, anywhere. And that was the idea.
Being force majeure, actually, although it's a bummer, wouldn't it allow you to go set it up with someone else?
It would, but he's still up in Vancouver making X-Files too.
Right. All right. Okay, one or two last questions right there as you, sir, in the aisle. This is an interesting question. We got into it briefly earlier. Some of the humor, how much of it did you laugh right in, and did they laugh at the expected times? It's interesting because I've seen it twice now with audiences. On the most laughter occasionally comes on the flashbacks Some of it is a tension release of people that are in a cliffhanger moment being yanked out of it, really wanting to see what happens. I'm not sure what the rest are, but what is your viewpoint on the humor?
Well, it was supposed to be funny when William Hurt said he doesn't look like me. I can start there. That's safer. The rewind transitions were something that I thought was an interesting editorial decision. It wasn't something that was in the script. And in terms of when I was standing in back for the last few minutes, some of the laughter that I heard, I'm sure it wasn't scripted.
Well, it's strange though, because both times I've seen it, they do laugh when Quaid says, "Mr. President, are you okay?" And it becomes this very cute love story. But at the same time, there was also, but for real, there were people clapping too. So it's almost like Quaid, the whole movie, his goal is to protect the president. He's lost him. He thinks he's dead, and then suddenly he's just rolling around pretty much okay in this ambulance. So from his point of view, or should I say, from his vantage point, it's suddenly this great moment for Quaid, and it did evoke both laughter, but I also got to say a lot of applause too.
The unrated version is awesome.
Last question, you sir. No. That's an interesting question. I mean, because you could also you could put it to the cop too. I mean, it was about the actions the terrorists do in this movie. So I mean, you have I'm going to throw in the cop. The special forces guy who is certainly killing a lot of people to save his brother, and inversely Sam, who is steering off course to save a little girl's life when he has no problems killing that same little girl in the Plaza Square.
Right. Well, here's the best way I know how to answer the question. Is someone was asking earlier about things, sort of the way this sort of process works. We have no way of sort of looking at both. What I can tell you is this: is that when it was 7 stories, when we would understand that these people were human, just like us, when there was no separation between the light with which we cast upon the heroes or the villains, in that light, to believe that they're people, that it's the guy who walks in and blows himself up, is kissing a picture of a family that he has value to something in his life, I think is important. Because I think the moment we make everyone out to be so unlike us, it makes it harder for everyone to sort of figure it out. And so I definitely think that I can't speak to... I'm one of many collaborators here, but what I can say is I hoped that on the page it existed where it was plausible because everyone was human.
You've been very generous with your time. I can't wait to see what you do next. Give it up for Barry Levy.
Thank you, Jeff.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Thanks again to screenwriter Barry Levy for spending time with us to discuss his debut studio film, Vantage Point. If you dug this episode of the podcast in general, consider tossing a virtual tip into our PayPal virtual tip jar by visiting www.creativescreenwritingmagazine.blogspot.com and look for the PayPal icon. Your tips are appreciated and definitely help out with equipment, hard drives, and all the other stuff we need to keep this podcast running. Of course, feel free to check out my blog, which I even managed to update on the rare occasion that I have time to do so by visiting www.jeffgoldsmith.blogspot.com. You can also always feel free to drop me a line by emailing me at yo.goldsmith@gmail.com, and I'll do my darndest to get back to you as soon as I can. Of course, don't forget to click that subscribe button in iTunes or your podcatching software, because that's how episodes are downloaded automatically every time you click refresh. And if you have a minute, feel free to leave us positive feedback in the iTunes Music Store or at podcastalley.com. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, thanking you again for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.